Why would you build an acoustic ceiling cloud that's bigger than a double bed and hangs above your head all day? And how would you do this safely? I'll show you. G'day, it's Ron from Elfshot Design. I'm going to talk about this film in two parts. First part is about how I built a recessed hole in the ceiling to hang the cloud from. I did that because I wanted to add a bit of class to the project, and it gave me a bit of a challenge as well. The second part, I'm going to talk about the materials I used and the approach I took to actually put the acoustic panel together, and then how I hung it in the ceiling recess, which was quite an engineering challenge. So why bother with the ceiling cloud at all? In a home studio, the ceiling is one of the biggest early reflective surfaces in the room, and it sits right above your head, exactly where early reflections bounce straight back into your ears. An acoustic cloud breaks that up. To work out the size and position, I looked at where I sit, where my speakers are. That gave me a minimum footprint, then I made it a bit bigger to give the overall recess effect an intentional aesthetic. Because this cloud spans 2.6 metres with no wall support underneath, I couldn't just rely on the existing joists. I needed to add double headers, 140 by 45 millimeters, to carry that extra span without sagging. Then I had to work out the depth of the recess itself, enough room for the cloud's thickness, plus 100 mm above and around the sides for acoustic performance, as well as enabling lighting effects. The tricky part was I only had limited space above. The shed structural steel truss runs right across, so I had to squeeze everything in, while also making sure no structure-borne vibration could travel from this room through to the shed frame. I have reinforced it quite heavily with the double headers, and it's very solid. I can hang off this thing and it doesn't sag at all. I'll show you. It's not sagging. I can't get down. Ooh. I'm just going through now and adding all my horizontal noggins to the studs. I'm also blocking in along the top plate there to create a cavity, so the plasterboard will form the ceiling. On top of that will go the insulation, the ceiling bats, and then another layer of plasterboard on top of that. It'll help with the acoustics, but importantly it'll stop the mice getting in and nesting. We don't want mice. I'm making sure there's no bugs, no mice, doing whatever I can to block any little holes to get those little critters out. It's a little bit dark, but hopefully this gives you an idea of what I'm doing up here. You can see the cavity where I'm adding the bats. Now I'm just running some sheets of gyprock over the top to cover them up. This one here is loose and ready to screw down once I've added the bats. I just put it up here earlier, so I wouldn't have to get it up here more awkwardly later on. While I was framing, I had to think ahead to how to hang this safely. So I added extra lumber in exactly the spots I'd need for the lag screws, one in each corner. I already had structure in the middle, so that gave me 6 solid fixing points. One compromise to note, I didn't want to run an extra layer of plasterboard above the cloud recess because it would have added extra weight to the centre section supported by those extra headers. So instead, I taped sarking down over the bats. It's fine from an insulation perspective, but there is a bit of a weak point for sound transmission, and when it rains really hard, I can hear it hitting the iron roof. You can see over there's the ducting going out, and then this is the edge running along the side that I still need to add the insulation and cover it up. For the frame, I went with yellow tongue flooring ripped into strips. The approach was a single 120mm outer frame for the overall cloud shape, then 3 separate panels built to drop into that frame. Only the facing edge would be visible, so they didn't need to be the full 120 to save some weight. Building this way had 2 big advantages. The inner frames add extra rigidity to the overall structure, and building each panel separately meant I could wrap each one in fabric I'd bought locally without any joins. You can see I've got one of my panels built. I'm going to leave that in place to keep the whole frame square while I measure up for this last one here, and I'll do the centre one last, basically subtracting whatever gap I need for the width. You can also see here in the corners I've added some spaces. There's a 1/2 mil and a 1.5 mil, the blue and the red. That just keeps it out from the frame, just the right amount to allow for the material when it folds over and gets pinned down on the outside of the internal frame.
I staple one long edge of the finishing fabric. It's a cotton synthetic blend, so it's got a little bit of stretch, but not too much. Starting from the centre, I'll pull it taut and staple along toward the corners. I used a scrap piece of timber to stop the sides pulling together while I add tension to the fabric. I move it as I work along so everything stays square and even.
I'm just adding a little bit of tension on the sides as I pull this way. I'm also just putting a little bit of tension on the corner as well. Starting from the centre and just stretching it, making sure there's no creases as I go.
Once all the four edges are stapled, it's onto the corners. I pull the fabric tight on the short side, pop in a single staple to hold it, then trim the bulk out of the corner so it folds in nice and flat. There's a bit of adjusting to get the fold tucked nicely, so you get one single neat fold running down the corner. Once you pull that final corner across nice and hard, staple it all down and tap everything flush with a light hammer.
So now we should have a nice panel that I can put somewhere safe. Get the dust off. And put that somewhere out of the way so it doesn't get damaged or filthified.
I went with polyester over fiberglass. It costs a bit more, but if any little particles ever drift down while I'm working underneath, polyester is way safer to be breathing.
The fabric on the bottom of the ceiling cloud needs to be thin enough to allow sound to pass through, but it's also got to be strong enough that the weight of the bats on top don't cause it to sag over time. I've got one layer of 90mm bats covering the whole thing, and then I've got an extra layer split in half sitting over where the joins are of my panels. So the joins will take up some of the weight of the extra layer, and that extra layer is half, so it's roughly 45mm thick, so it's less weight. And then right in the middle where there's no support, I've got an even thinner layer on top of my 90mm layer, about 20-30mm, so it's much lighter. Hopefully that won't cause extra sag in the middle.
Once the bats were placed, I rolled out some dust cover fabric, which keeps it tidy and also prevents any fibres from floating around off the top of the cloud. I'm running thin strips of 3mm MDF around the edges for the LED lighting channel. The channel just sits here, so the MDF isn't doing much. It's just a horizontal platform, which is nice and light to keep the weight down. This is my securing system. Stainless steel lag bolts with carabiners and a short length of chain. Everything's rated well above the weight it needs to support, and there's 6 of these going into the corners and in the centre of the cloud.
Now the biggest challenge with this project was getting the cloud up in the air. My original plan was to have one person on each corner climbing up ladders and hoisting the thing up, and then somebody would go around and clip the carabiners, but that wasn't going to work. Far too heavy, even though I made it as light as possible. So I had to come up with a different technique. I ended up using ropes. Because I was so busy lifting the cloud, I didn't capture a lot of footage, but I will give you a demonstration using my gym as a prop on the 2 knots that I used to essentially lift a little bit at a time and lock it, then go around to the other rope, lift, lock. And with the 6 ropes, I was able to go all the way up the 2.6 metres and finally get the thing to the top. And it was pretty much a one-person job. So the 2 knots I used was a bowline and a midshipman's hitch. Okay, so I'll start with the bowline, which is a way of creating a loop around an object, and it locks so it doesn't slip. So you start by going around, then the long end of the rope, you create a loop. Now the way this was explained to me as a Boy Scout was a rabbit and a tree. So the rabbit comes out his hole, and he runs around the tree, then he jumps back into his hole again. Then on this end, you tighten that up, you end up with something that looks like that. Now if I pull on this end, that's completely self-locking. That's the bowline. So now we've got our heavy object secured with the bowline. I'm going to go chuck this under the gym and I'll show you how you can hoist this up using the Midshipman's hitch to lock the rope back on itself so you can gradually get this thing higher and higher in the air. For this demo I'm just using a pulley, but when I put the cloud up, this was one of the lag bolts fixed into the ceiling. So I'm going to pull this through until it takes up the slack. So this is the dumbbell end. And you see now I'm just starting to take a bit of the weight. So what I'll do now is create the hitch. So we go around to make one loop. Now I'm going to make a second loop underneath that first loop. So I'll go around again. See, I've made a second loop underneath the first one. So now that's going to form the lock. Now I go around and make a third one underneath both those. So you end up with one underneath here. Pull the loose rope through. And now that's the Midshipman's hitch. And as I lift this and slip it down, it's locking every time. So I can just lift and lock. Just took a bit of time, but eventually got the thing to the top. Then it was just a case of clipping it off, and fortunately it hung nice and level, so job done.
I couldn't really do before and after acoustic measurement tests because I wanted to finish this part before moving on to the other panels, but I can say the overall balance of the room feels good so far. Time will tell when I get back into some audio producing. And a month on, there's absolutely no sign of the bats sagging against the fabric, a huge relief, so I'm feeling this one's done and dusted. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.